You've been carrying guilt about money your entire spiritual life, and you were never told that the guilt itself might be the problem, not the money, the guilt. There is a passage in Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 18, that the rabbis have been teaching for over 3,000 years, a passage that sits right at the center of how Judaism understands the relationship between God, covenant, and financial capacity, and almost every church on the planet has either ignored it, softened it, or translated it in a way that strips out the most confronting thing it actually says. What does it say? I'm about to show you. And once you see it in the Hebrew, once you follow the exact words the Torah uses, you will never be able to look at your financial life the same way again. But I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to show you doesn't work if you jump ahead. Every word I give you builds on the one before it, and by the time we get to the end, the conflict you've been carrying between your faith and your finances will have an answer, not from a motivational speaker, not from a self-help book, but from the text itself. Stay. This matters. And if you're new here, if this is the first time you're seeing how the Hebrew text opens up things that most translations hide, subscribe right now. Every week I go back to the original language and pull out what was buried. What you're about to hear today is exactly why this channel exists. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted financial stability and then felt a flicker of shame for wanting it? Like wanting to prosper somehow made you less spiritual? Like the truly faithful person was supposed to be content with less, detached from the material, unbothered by money? If you have, I need you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to say. That feeling, that guilt, that suspicion about your own desire to flourish did not come from the Torah. It came from somewhere else entirely, and once I show you where it actually came from, you're going to understand why it's been so hard to shake. Because it's not a personal weakness, it's a theological infection that entered the faith centuries ago and was never fully identified for what it was. Here's what happened. Around the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, early Christian theologians were working in a Greek-speaking world deeply shaped by Platonic philosophy. And one of the foundational ideas in Platonic thought is this: the physical world is lower. The material realm is inferior to the spiritual realm. The body is a cage for the soul. Matter is suspect. Anything physical, including money, carries an inherent spiritual taint. That idea is not in the Torah. It is not in Genesis, Deuteronomy, Proverbs, Isaiah, or any book of the Hebrew Bible. It is Greek philosophy, Plato, not Moses. But when Greek-speaking theologians began synthesizing Christian theology with the philosophical world they lived in, that idea came with them, and it attached itself to the teaching of the faith like a parasite on a host. And for 17 centuries, most of the Western Christian world has been preaching a theology of poverty as virtue and calling it biblical. It is not biblical, not in the Hebrew sense of that word. And here is the evidence. Look at the wealthiest figures in the Hebrew Bible: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Boaz, Solomon. Every single one of them carries enormous financial resources, and the text never treats their wealth as a spiritual liability, never presents them as people who are rich despite their relationship with God. The Torah presents their prosperity as direct evidence of covenant, as confirmation that the agreement between God and his people was active and operational. Which means the question you need to ask is not, is it spiritual to want to prosper? That question was planted in you by Greek philosophy, not by the Hebrew text. The real question, the one the Torah actually asks, is this: do you understand what Deuteronomy 8:18 says God put inside you, and are you using it? Because if you don't know what it says, you cannot answer that question honestly. And if you cannot answer that question honestly, you will keep carrying guilt that was never yours to carry, and keep living below a capacity that God himself embedded in your life as a covenant sign. Let's go to the text. Deuteronomy 8:18. In Hebrew, V'zacharta et Adonai Elohecha kihu hanoten. Lecha koach la'asot chayil, lema'an hakim et brito. Most English translations render it something like this: you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant. Power to get wealth. That's the standard translation. And it's not wrong, but it is dramatically incomplete, in a way that changes everything about how you understand what God is actually saying in this verse. the word translated as power. That word in Hebrew is coach, and coach is not ordinary human strength, not willpower, not work ethic, not talent. Coach in the Hebrew Bible is divine capacity. It is ability that originates outside of you, placed inside you by God Himself. It is the same word used for Samson's strength, the strength that had nothing to do with Samson's personal discipline and everything to do with what God had placed on him. The text is explicit. When the Spirit withdrew, the coach went with it. It is the same word the prophets use for the capacity that brought creation into order. It is the same concept the apostolic writings apply to the power that raised Yeshua from the dead. This is not your ambition. This is not your hustle. This is not your network or your intelligence or your ability to grind through difficulty. Coach is divine capacity, and Deuteronomy 8:18 says, God gives it to you, actively, as a present tense covenant act, for a specific purpose, la'asot chayil, to produce chayil. And now we need to talk about chayil, because chayil is where the whole structure of Western theology breaks down completely. Chayil, one of the most important words in the Hebrew Bible, and one of the most consistently mistranslated in a way that has cost people decades of clarity. In most English translations, chayil appears in different places as different words. Sometimes it's valor, sometimes it's wealth or riches, sometimes it's strength or excellence or virtue, and translators made a choice. They looked at the context and picked the meaning that seemed to fit. But here's the problem with that choice. In Hebrew, chayil is not three different words that happen to sound the same. It is one word. It carries all of those meanings simultaneously, and the Torah never separates them, because in the thinking of the Hebrew text they are not separable things. Go to Ruth 2:1. Boaz is introduced, and the Hebrew says, Ish Gibor Chayil, a man of great chayil. Now, is that a description of his moral character? Yes. Is it a description of his financial standing in the community? Also yes. Is it a description of his social strength and influence? Yes to that too. All at once. One word. No separation. Because in Hebrew thought, a man who walks in moral integrity, manages his resources with wisdom and carries weight in his community. That man is chayil. And Deuteronomy 8:18 says, God gave you coach, divine capacity, to produce that. To produce chayil, character and wealth and strength woven together, because the Hebrew never imagined they could come apart. Now go to Proverbs 31, the famous passage about the Eshet Chayil, the woman of chayil. Read what that woman actually does in the text. She considers a field and buys it. She makes linen garments and sells them. She trades. She manages. She produces revenue. She provides for her household and her workers. She builds financial systems around herself that sustain people. The Hebrew text does not apologize for any of that. It does not treat her financial activity as something separate from her spiritual character that happens to coexist. It calls the whole package chayil. That is the word of honor. That is the description of excellence, which means this: the separation between financial flourishing and spiritual virtue is not a Hebrew category. The Torah does not know how to make that distinction. It does not have a word for the kind of spirituality that regards financial capacity as suspect. That category was imported from Plato through Greek-speaking Christianity, and it landed on people like you and told you that wanting to prosper was somehow not fully faithful. That is a lie. It is not a lie you invented, but it is a lie you have been living inside, and the Hebrew text is the thing that exposes it. Now stop for a moment, because I want to make sure this doesn't slide past you the way comfortable teaching slides past people. You may have spent years, decades, in a spiritual environment where prosperity was subtly discouraged, where having ambitions around money made you feel like you were missing something spiritually, where the people who really trusted God were the ones who didn't talk about finances, didn't chase provision, just waited and prayed and trusted. And maybe you thought that was the Torah's position. Maybe you thought that was what faithfulness looked like. How much did that cost you? Not just financially, although it may have cost you significantly there too. How much did it cost you in terms of the energy you spent managing guilt that was never yours? The prayers you prayed apologizing for desires that the Torah itself called covenant evidence. The capacity you left on the table because you didn't understand what God said He placed inside you. That is not a small question. That is the question this passage forces you to face. If you're walking through something right now, if the gap between where you are financially and where the covenant points is painful and real, and you need someone to stand with you in prayer, leave your name in the comments below, just your name. I read them, and I pray over them. You are not alone in this, and this channel exists precisely for moments like this one. Now, we need to go to one more word before we can talk about what this means practically. Asar, Ashar. In Deuteronomy 8:18, the passage talks about God giving you koch la asot chayil, divine capacity to produce chayil. But there is a companion word in the Hebrew vocabulary of prosperity that connects directly to this passage, and that most people have never examined in its original form. Asar is the verb that means to become wealthy, to grow rich, and it appears throughout the wisdom literature in ways that go far beyond a simple description of financial increase. But here is what almost nobody teaches. Asar is linguistically connected to the concept of maaser, the tithe, the tenth, the same root, the same family of meaning. Now, before you hear the word tithe and assume you know where this is going, stop. I am not preaching a sermon about giving money to a church. That is not what I am doing here. What I am doing is showing you something about the Hebrew language itself. The fact that asar, to become wealthy, shares a root with maser, the tenth, is not an accident of language. Hebrew is not accidental. The Torah is not accidental. And the linguistic connection tells you something about how the Hebrew mind understood the relationship between the act of releasing and the act of increase. In Hebrew thinking, the tithe was not a payment, it was not a tax, it was not even primarily an act of worship in the external sense. It was an act of alignment. It was the mechanism by which a person declared in action, not just in words, that they understood where Coach came from, that they understood who the source was, that the capacity inside them was not self-generated. When you hold the tenth, you are functionally saying, this Coach is mine. I produced it, I keep it. When you release the tenth, you are saying with your action, and not your words, your action, this Coach was placed in me by the one who owns everything, and I am operating within the covenant, not outside it. That is what the linguistic root tells you. Not that you owe money, not that God needs your money, but that the act of releasing is itself the declaration that covenant is active, and that declaration, in Hebrew thought, was the posture from which chayil flows. You don't have to take my word for it. Open Proverbs 10:22 in Hebrew. Birkat Adonai hi ta'ashir. The blessing of the Lord it enriches. The verb for enriches, ta'ashir. Same root as asar, same family. The blessing of the Lord is what causes asar, not your cleverness, not your timing, not your network. The Birkat Adonai, the blessing that comes from the Lord, is what produces the increase. And now you need to see where all of this is going, because none of this is abstract theology. The Hebrew Bible does not exist to give you interesting ideas to think about. It exists to describe reality as it actually operates, and to show you how to live inside that reality rather than fighting it. Go to Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65:17 opens with God declaring, Behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth. And the word he uses for create, you already know it. Bara, the verb from Genesis 1:1. The verb that belongs only to God. The verb that means origination from nothing, not rearrangement of existing material. God says, I am baraing something new. And then he describes what that new creation looks like. Most people stop at the concept and never read what comes next. They hear new heavens and new earth and file it under eschatology, distant future, spiritual promises, not relevant to daily life. But look at what the text actually says in the verses that follow. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build, and another can habit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain. Read that slowly. Build houses. Live in them. Not build for someone else to benefit. Plant vineyards, eat the fruit, not work the ground and have the harvest taken. Enjoy the work of your hands, not labor in vain. This is the description of the new creation that God promises to bara. And it is not abstract spiritual language. It is economic language. It is the language of ownership, of productive labor that belongs to the one who did the work, of a complete and final end to the cycle of effort without return. The God who barred you from nothing, the same act described in Genesis 1:27, when God created humanity with the same verb he used to create the cosmos, that God promises to bara a new creation, and the economic architecture is built into the description of that new creation from the beginning. So now put the entire chain together, because this is where it becomes something you cannot walk away from without making a decision. You were barad, originated from nothing by an act of divine creation, the same verb used for the cosmos. God did not assemble you from available material. He originated you. Inside that barad being, Deuteronomy 8:18 says, God placed coach, divine capacity, not human ambition, to produce chayil, which is simultaneously wealth and character, and strength, because the Hebrew never separated them. The mechanism of alignment with that coach is connected linguistically to asar, the releasing of the 10th as a declaration that the covenant is active, that the source is acknowledged, that you are operating from inside the relationship and not outside it, and the trajectory of the entire covenant, the destination that bara, coach, chayil, and asar are all pointing toward, is Isaiah 65, a world where the people of God build and inhabit, plant and eat, work and benefit from the work of their hands. That is not a world that endorses poverty as spiritual virtue. That is a world where productive capacity is restored, honored, and protected as part of what it means for covenant to be fully operational. You were not made to feel guilty for wanting to live inside that trajectory. You were made to understand what it costs to live there, and to make the daily decisions that keep you aligned with it rather than fighting it. So here is what this costs you, and I need you to hear this clearly because teaching without cost is not teaching, it is entertainment. This costs you the comfort of victimhood. The idea that you would be prospering right now if only your circumstances were different, that idea has to go. Because Deuteronomy 8:18 is not describing capacity that God placed in other people and withheld from you. It is describing what he placed in you. And if it is in you and you are not accessing it, the question is not about what God did or didn't do. The question is about alignment. This costs you the peace of passivity. The idea that faithfulness means waiting for provision to arrive without doing the hard work of understanding what you carry and how to steward it, that has to go too. The Eshet Chayil in Proverbs 31 is not waiting. She is working, assessing, deciding, building. That is the model the Hebrew text holds up as chayil. This costs you the security of your current theology. If you are taught that poverty is spiritual safety, if that belief is embedded in your community, your family, your tradition, naming it as a Greek philosophical import rather than Torah will create friction. It may make people around you uncomfortable. It may make you uncomfortable. That is part of the cost. But the alternative is more expensive. The alternative is continuing to carry guilt that was never yours, limiting yourself with a theology that the Torah rejects, and living decades below the coach that God embedded in you as a covenant sign. That is the real cost of staying where you are. Now here is your assignment, not a suggestion, a task. Open Deuteronomy 8:17-18 with an interlinear tool, Blue Letter, BibleWorks, Bible Hub Works, any tool that shows you the Hebrew and the Strong's number alongside the English. Find the word coach. Look at Strong's H3581, then trace that word through the Hebrew Bible. Every place it appears, Samson, the prophets, the Psalms, the wisdom literature. Let the pattern build itself. Then open Proverbs 10:22, read it in Hebrew. Birkat Adonai hitashir v'lo Yosef etzev imo. The blessing of the Lord enriches, and he adds no sorrow with it. The verb for enriches is ta'ashir, the same root as asar. Write that down. Let it connect to what you heard today. Then open Ruth 2.1. Find Ish Gibbachayil. Look at how Boaz is introduced, not as a spiritual man who also happens to be rich, as a man of chayil, the full word, the full meaning, undivided. Do those 3 things this week, not someday, this week. Here is your prayer. Say this with the full weight of what coach actually carries in the Hebrew, not as a wish, as a covenant declaration. You are the source. You placed coach inside me, divine capacity, not human ambition, to produce chayil, as the sign of your covenant over my life. I align myself with what you placed in me. I release the grip of a theology that was never yours. I receive what the covenant says belongs to me. Say that over. your work, over your finances, over the situations where you have been praying for provision and wondering why it feels slow. Say it with what you now know coach means, and let the weight of the Hebrew carry the prayer rather than your feelings about it. If this channel has been changing the way you read the Torah, if these conversations in the original language are opening things that you never had access to before, subscribe now. Every week we go back to the Hebrew and pull out what was hidden. This is not the last time you're going to need what lives in that original language. Stay close. And before you go, 2 things I want from you in the comments. First, if you are carrying something financially right now that feels impossible, a situation where the gap between where you are and where the covenant points is painful, and you need prayer, leave your name below. Just your name. I read the comments. I pray over them. You are not walking through this alone. Second, what is the biggest mental block you have carried between your faith and your finances? Was it something you were taught? Did you find it in the text yourself? Or have you been carrying it so long you don't even know where it came from? Leave that answer below. I want to read it, because those answers will shape what we build next. Next time, there is a prayer embedded in Nehemiah, 14 verses rarely preached in full, that moved the hand of God over an impossible provision situation and reversed it. In 52 days, not a general feeling of breakthrough, a specific, documented reversal of circumstances in 52 days. I'm going to show you the exact structure of that prayer, what Nehemiah said, in what order, using what Hebrew words, and how to apply that structure to whatever feels financially impossible in your life right now. That's next. You don't want to miss it. Shalom, my friend. Until next time.